Welcome, brothers and sisters, to Skull Nation and Bones About It podcast. Today's story will be based on my journey and memories within Skull Nation. The beginning. My journey with Skull Nation begins in the mid-1970s. It all started in my parents' garage. Our family would store their motorcycles for the winter. My cousin and I would sneak in the garage, sit on those bikes, and plan out our adventures across the United States. We thought we decided on a new club and a name. We both went to our neighborhood friends to pitch the idea. We would start a club with the purpose of forming a motorcycle club when we came of age. Now, we all knew motorcycle clubs existed in the city. We just did not know at the time any of the names or even what the motorcycle community was about. We would learn that much later. Because we were not of age, this club would be based on riding bicycles. We would set up places to travel. We'd set up stunts and racing competitions between each member. Back in the 1970s, bicycles had chain guards with names on them. We would use those names as our personal club nicknames. Now, my cousin and I lived in different sections within the city, and as young men, the distance was not that close. We would learn, as adults, they were very close. My cousin's guys accepted the name, but my guys hated the name. So we would be faced with the club's first crisis. We settled our first crisis with we will be one club with two charters, both using different names, until agreement upon a name was accepted. For the next few years, we rode those bikes throughout our city and the metro parks. We raced, we did our stunts. This was truly an innocent and fun time. Sadly, with age and other groups learning of our existence, all would change. We were becoming older. Both charters agreed we needed a unified name for this club. Sadly, again, a unified name would not be decided. So each charter did change to a more grown-up name. My group would become the Lords of Cleveland, while my cousin's group would become the Maniacs of Ohio. We did decide on our first club symbol, which would be a Grim Reaper. So off we all went to the mall, where a company did airbrushing, and we'd have a Grim Reaper airbrushed on all of our blue jean vests. During this time, our racing and stunts became less important, and hanging out at places and fighting with other groups became more important. I would always attempt to stress that we needed to stay with the original plan and prepare for the days when we would get our motorcycles and ride. The Warlord Era. By the end of 1979, as I was hanging out with a member, Animal, we were trying to come up with a name to unify the club. Now, back then, I was obsessed with skulls, not much different than today. So I blurted out Skull Nation. Animal loved the name. So we took this name to both charters, and it passed. We also redesigned the symbol. We officially became Skull Nation, January 1st of 1980. Our new symbol would be a skull without the lower jaw with fangs. The skull would wear a gladiator helmet with the letters SN in the center, and a sword going through the center of the skull with 3 drops of blood. We would call our colors Bitch Black and Blood Red. To distinguish each charter from each other, instead of using territorial names, change the names from the Lords of Cleveland to the Skull Nation Warlords, and the Maniacs of Ohio to the Skull Nation Maniacs. During this period, the members were slowly going from dirt bikes and mopeds. Skull Nation was still battling with other groups during this time, much more frequently. Late in 1982, the Skull Nation Maniac members were all moving on from Skull Nation, so a decision was made for them to be absorbed into the Skull Nation Warlords, and we would move the Skull Nation Maniacs to the eastern suburbs, where they would become the Skull Nation Renegades. By 1984, Skull Nation was having internal fights among members. Some were unable to purchase motorcycles, and others just faded away to new lives. By 1985, shell of itself, a decision was made to end the warlords. So we went to an old school in the neighborhood that we used to hang out in, and was now under construction. The contractors allowed us to bury our vests, symbols, and other miscellaneous things in a stairwell they were filling in with concrete, gravel, and cement. It became the lowest point of Skull Nation. But a miracle was on the way. The girl I was dating, her father would offer me an opportunity. He said, if I would paint his house, he would pay me with a motorcycle. At first I thought he was bluffing, so unfortunately for them, I accepted and took the job. Now I have never done painting before, so looking back, I didn't mix the paint right, and as I painted on certain spots, you could see white streaks. Poor family. After the job, he came through and gave me that motorcycle. But with this bike, it started a spark that would have Skull Nation and the dream of the motorcycle club. I will always be grateful to that girl and her father for that miracle. Miracle number 2 would occur. I would meet a new partner. This would spark what would bring about the Skull Nation Motorcycle Club. Ram was another neighborhood guy. We would see him riding all over on his moped during the warlord era. Ram would end up working at the same place that I was working at. At this time, we were both now riding motorcycles. With the assistance of Ram, we would put together Skull Nation motorcycle runs. These runs are still what we follow today. With these 2 miracles, Skull Nation was reborn. To preserve the history of the charters, they would now be referred to as committees. The Skull Nation Warlords would become the Skull Nation Horsemen. The Skull Nation Renegades would become the Skull Nation Barbarians. The next spark for Skull Nation is when Ram introduced us to his uncle, who was a former member of a motorcycle club. He then showed us his chopper. That chopper would be the final spark for Skull Nation. We knew this club needed to live. Skull Nation would be rededicated with the signing on a concrete bench at the Edgewater Pier. Sadly for Skull Nation, a storm hit that pier in the 1980s, taking it to the bottom of Lake Erie. During this era, Skull Nation was very pure. We rode, had parties, and made many great memories. During this time frame, all of the members were beginning to have families, get married. So Skull Nation life was slowing down. We would still have our runs during the summer and share with our families the rest of the time. I would marry a beautiful woman that would accept the importance of the meaning of Skull Nation. For me, she would give me 3 great children who would share in the joy of Skull Nation. She would work extremely hard so that Skull Nation's social events went well, and she is responsible for many of the pictures and videos that Skull Nation will share on this YouTube channel. The Phantom or Modern Era. In the 1990s, I wanted more for Skull Nation. I began exploring ideas and ways to strengthen Skull Nation. I met with other clubs to get a better understanding how those clubs worked. I talked with some of the members of the large clubs in my city. They informed me Skull Nation could not have red lettering, no territorial patches, no cubes, no diamonds. So for the redesign, Skull Nation letterings went from red to silver. The symbol was redesigned with a skull with fangs, the gladiator helmet, and a dagger coming out of the skull's mouth instead of the old sword. Skull Nation began a resurgence, and on January 1st, 1996, Skull Nation became organized officers were officially set for the first time since the Warlord era. We began writing a new constitution and bylaws. We added the third committee, the Skull Nation Lost Souls. Each committee had different personalities. We added the Sportsman Club within Skull Nation. We added more motorcycle rides and social events. It became the beginning of our yearly calendar. Skull Nation would officially add the roses. Women have always been a strong presence within Skull Nation, even in the early years, and organizing the roses gave the women an official platform within Skull Nation. January 1st of 2003, Skull Nation formed the Blazing Spirits Ministries for Christian-minded members and the ministry of those in need. In 2004, Skull Nation would update its symbol to what you see today, and each part of the symbol would receive its meaning. The flames represent God. The horns represent strength. The helmet represents protection. The skull represents humanity. The dagger represented destiny. The blood represented Christ. The Brotherhood Era. 2017, we entered the Skull Nation Brotherhood Era. We began the release of the charters to its members. We added more motorcycle events and began sharing our adventures and making memories with other clubs. As with all groups, there will be losses and triumphs. I look forward to a bright future. Thank you all for listening to my story. This was just a small journey of mine, my life within Skull Nation. So please, hit the bell, like, and subscribe for the next stories.